Hello, hello.
Hello, teacher. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Yes, I practiced specialization
Mm-hmm.
and trading, and I'm really good in it. On it.
Good. All it takes is a little bit of practice, and then yeah, it should be fine.
Yeah. One question.
Yep.
Comparative absolute advantage is only like the one who produces more.
Yeah.
Like it isn't like the ratio, nothing. Like absolute.
Yeah. Just absolute advantage. Who's
I
able to? We either say it as you're able to produce with fewer resources, okay, or we say that with your resources you're able to produce more.
Yes,
Yeah.
and
But
the comparative advantage is the one that, for example, in the potatoes,
hmm
the one that if X needs one meat to produce a potato and Y needs two
hmm
potatoes produce two meats to produce a potato,
hmm
the X has the comparative advantage.
Yeah, what you're saying there is whoever has lower opportunity cost, whoever has to give up less. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's where the comparative advantage is going to lie. Again, for us, when we talk about specialization trade, comparative advantage is what we focus on. Absolute advantage tells us absolutely nothing. Okay. Any other random questions before we get started? Good. Okay, so we're gonna pump through this material pretty quickly. Um, at the top of class, I'll keep a couple minutes open so that if you guys have questions about the old material, just ask me. Okay. All right. So today we're moving on to a brand new topic, and this is pretty much what we're going to be covering for the rest of micro. Okay. We started in with this idea of production possibilities frontier. Now, it's a good idea, it's a good story, but it's not very realistic. Okay, because again, we're assuming that there's countries out there or people out there that produce two products and only two products. Okay, well, again, it helps us understand how people make decisions, but it's not very realistic. So, starting today, we're going to come up with our main microeconomic model, which is going to be demand and supply. And even this model, it's based on a lot of assumptions. It's simplifying the world a lot, okay, but still, it's a little bit more realistic than the PPF model. Okay. So the basics are pretty understandable. You guys pretty much know supply and demand without knowing supply and demand. You see this stuff in your everyday lives. Okay. So the demand side, well, here in the product market, that's going to come from the buyers. Okay. And the supply side, that's just going to come from the sellers. Okay. So we have different names for these. We call these consumers and producers. Sometimes we call these households and these guys firms. By the way, firms is just a special name for businesses or companies. Okay, but the basic idea is we have buyers and we have sellers of products. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how these buyers and these sellers make decisions about how much to buy and how much to sell. Okay, let me load up the slides. Okay, starting in with the demand side. So we're going to talk about the different determinants of demand. This is a little bit easier because you have to think like the buyer. Well, that's easy because you guys, your entire lives so far, have been buying, buying, buying stuff. Okay. When we'll take a look at supply next time, it's a little bit more confusing because up until this point, I don't think you guys have supplied or produced all that much stuff. Okay. But trust me, you guys buy stuff all the time. So try to see what determines how much of something you decide to buy. Okay, there's a whole bunch of different determinants that we focus on here in micro. Um, we listed out, but these are things that you think about in everyday life. Okay, without even knowing these concepts, without knowing these terms, these are ideas that you guys already know. Okay, so first up, remember that basic economic problem. People have unlimited wants. Even for these buyers, these consumers, they want to buy up as much stuff as possible. Okay, I want Coke and Pepsi and computers and desks and chairs and ice cream and hot dogs and anything and everything. I always want to buy more, 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 more. But here, my limited resource is income. Okay, I just don't have enough money to buy everything that I want. But what happens if we have a rise in income? We have more income now than we did before. Well, that's going to lead to a rise in demand of most products out there. You earn more money, you demand more of a product. Okay, that totally makes sense. Now, in econ, we don't like writing things out. It just takes way too long and it's annoying. Okay, so we use little symbols. We say a rise in income leads to a rise in demand. Up Y is equal to up D. Now, I guess one question you guys might be asking is, why the crap do we use Y for income instead of I? It's just what we do. Okay. In econ, I is going to mean something else later on in macroeconomics. Okay. And what you'll see is Y, it means income in macroeconomics too when we talk about GDP. Okay. For now, just know that for whatever reason, okay, when we talk about income, we use the letter capital Y. Okay. So for most products out there, as we earn more money, we start wanting more and more of a product. For example, I don't know. Why don't you guys give me an example? Give me any product out there.
And for example, there are Android phones that are cheaper, but maybe I buy them because I don't want to waste a lot of money in cell phone. But if
Hmm.
I got more and more money,
Hmm.
I'll buy an iPhone every year, even if it gets damaged or broken or bad battery, because that's what happens with iPhones.
So, what you're talking about, that example, man, it brings in a lot of these different determinants of demand. Okay. And in real life, that's how we make decisions. We think about all these different types of things. We think about Android versus iPhone. That's what we call substitutes. Okay. You think about how much money you have. You're thinking about your income. Okay. You think about battery life and all these other considerations. Okay. In econ, what we like to do is simplify things as much as possible. We were going to talk about this a little bit later on, but we'll talk about it right now. We have this idea in econ of something called ceteris paribus. Ceteris paribus. I know it sounds weird. It's Latin, okay, and it stands for all else equal. What that means is I know that people look at all of these guys at the same time when they're trying to figure out what to buy, okay, but when we take a look at models and graphs and tables, it's just really hard to figure things out if too many of these guys are changing at the same time. Okay, so what we do in econ is we pretend like everything is staying the same except for one thing. We like to focus on the change of one of these guys at a time. Okay, so let's say we're focusing on consumer income. While we look at this guy, we're pretending like, these guys, not that they don't exist, but whatever they are, they're staying the same. They're not changing at all. Okay, and then we'll go on and study this guy. But while we're looking at this, we're pretending like all of these other guys are staying the same, that they're not changing at all. Okay? Because if everything is changing at the same time, overall, it's very hard to figure out what's going on. Okay? I know people do that in everyday life. I mean, every day you think about all these things together and then you come up with a final decision. Okay? For us in econ, or at least in AP econ, okay, we're just going to be looking at one of these things at a time. So, here, we're just talking about your consumer income. So, in terms of those smartphones, okay, instead of thinking about substitutes and your taste and preferences about battery life, we're just going to focus on how much money you have. Okay. Now, things like smartphones, that's a little bit tricky because you really don't buy all too much of it. Okay, you buy one, and that's it. Okay, not many people out there have like two, three, four, five smartphones. Okay, so man, I hate to do this. I always talk about hot dogs in my classes for some strange reason. So let's say I freaking love hot dogs. Okay, man, I would eat hot dogs every day if I could, but I just don't have enough money for it. Okay, now if I have an increase in income, well, what's going to happen is I'm going to start demanding more hot dogs. Okay, I know demanding more eventually is going to mean that I'm going to buy more. Okay, but for now, all I'm saying is I have more income, and that's leading me to demand more hot dogs. These type of products are known as normal goods. Now, I know that normal in everyday speech, okay, it just means common or the usual stuff. In econ, though, normal means something very, very specific. Okay, a normal good, it has to do with an increase in income leading to an increase in demand. That's it. Okay, so I'm not talking about a common good or just a very whatever type of product. A normal good means an increase in income of this product leads to an increase in demand. Okay, of course, for all of what we're discussing, you could always go the opposite direction too. Man, I love hot dogs. If I have a decrease in income, though, that's going to lead me to decrease my demand of hot dogs. I love my hot dogs, but I just don't have enough money for it. Okay? So everything we talk about, you could go the opposite direction too. Okay? Now, another thing we love to do in econ is we talk about the way things usually are, and then we sit down and we think, well, not everything is like that all the time, all the time, all the time. I could think of some examples where, as I earn more money, that leads me to want less of this product. That kind of breaks our rule for a normal good. These types of products are actually known as inferior goods. Okay, and just by the name of it, you might be able to figure out what some inferior goods might be. And examples come to mind? Something where you earn more money, so you demand less of this product. Okay, you guys will be heading off to college very soon. You guys are going to get very, very familiar with cup noodles, cup ramen. Okay, college students eat this like crazy, not because it's good, but because it's fast and because it's cheap. So, what happens if you graduate from college and finally get a job and you start earning more and more money? Does that mean you start demanding more and more cup noodles? I really, really hope not. Okay? Because cup noodles are really bad for you. I hope what happens is as you earn more money, you stop eating these cup noodles and you start demanding better products, better food. Okay? So, cup noodles would be an inferior good. The more money you earn, you decrease your demand of this product. Okay? I could think of things like bus tickets. It's not like if you earn more money, you demand more bus tickets. No, actually, you demand fewer bus tickets. Okay? You start taking taxis or you go ahead and you buy your own car. All right? So, when your income goes up and your demand goes up, that's called a normal good. If your income goes up but your demand goes down, that's an inferior good. Okay? So, normal and inferior always has to do with income, income, and income, nothing else. All right? Next up, we have what you mentioned before, the price of substitutes. Okay? I guess we could talk about the iPhone and the or an iPhone and what's the Android phone? A Pixel. Okay, let's say that there's an increase in the price of iPhone. That's going to lead to what happening to the demand of Google Pixel phones? Well, if iPhones are more expensive and I freaking want a smartphone, iPhones are getting more and more expensive, so my demand of Pixels are going to start to go up. Okay, these are what's known as substitutes. We could go back to my hot dog example. If there's an increase, or let's flip this around now. If there's a decrease in the price of hot dogs, oops, sorry, a decrease in the price of hot dogs, how does that affect my demand of hamburgers? I love hot dogs, but I love hamburgers. Okay, for me, they're equally good types of junk food. But now, if hot dogs get cheaper, my demand of hamburgers, the substitute, is gonna go. Oh, wow, you could leave notes in there. Less demand, yeah. Okay, that totally makes sense. The missing little mini step here is as the price of hot dogs goes down, I start buying more hot dogs. But as I'm buying more hot dogs, that means my demand of the substitute of hamburgers starts to go down. Okay? So we have substitutes. We also have something known as complements. Okay? Careful, it's not a complement. compliment is something nice, you say. A complement with an E are products that go well together. Okay. So here, what is that? Mm, okay. Let's say there's an increase in the price of hot dogs. So what happens to my demand of Coke? So for me, I always eat my hot dog with a Coke. I never ever buy a hot dog without a Coke. I never ever buy a Coke without a hot dog. These are complements to me. They always are attached together. So now that hot dogs are more expensive, what happens to my demand of Coke? Hmm. Now my demand of Coke is going to go down. Again, the missing middle step here is as the price of hot dogs go up, I buy fewer hot dogs. It's too expensive. But as I buy fewer hot dogs, I need fewer of the stuff that goes along with hot dogs. Okay, my demand for the Coke starts to go down. Okay, so here, if the price of one product goes up and that leads to demand of the other product going down, that's known as a complement. Okay, if the price of one product goes up and the price or demand of the other product goes up, that's a substitute. Okay, I mean, we could try this with, let's say there's a decrease in the price of iPhones. What's going to happen to the demand of where? What the crap do you call those? AirPods? AirPod? Is that the earphones? I think so. Okay. As the price of iPhone goes down, the demand of the complementary product, the AirPods, starts to go up. Okay. So these guys move in opposite directions. That's going to be a complement. So far, everything we've talked about, ooh, that's interesting, but you guys know this stuff already. You guys think about this stuff already. All we're doing is we're putting a name to it, we're putting a concept to it. Okay. So that's the great thing about econ, you'll realize a lot of it is based on common sense. All we're trying to do is put models and graphs and equations to explain how people make decisions on their own. Okay. Next up, we have tastes and preferences, and this one is super easy. Okay, consumer taste change, and that's going to cause you to change demand of the product. Okay, so uh, what do I always say? If there's a story in the news that say eating a hot dog a day helps you live to be 100 years old, like hot dogs are really good for you. Well, that's going to change people's tastes and preferences. They're going to like the product a lot more, which means the demand of the product goes up. Okay, or um, in the past, there's been a lot of stories about how the Apple company, okay, they use a lot of almost like slave labor in China. Okay, they pay their workers very, very little money in these god awful factories to produce iPhones. So when those news stories first came out, okay, people were like, "Oh my God." Their tastes and their preferences for Apple products all of a sudden went down. The demand of iPhones went down for a little while. Okay, people got over it and they started buying iPhones again. Next up, we have future expectations. Okay, now this is interesting because what you think is going to happen in the future, that affects your decision making today. I really don't care if what you think is going to happen actually happens or not. Just because you think it's going to happen, okay, you're going to change around your decision making today. For example, let's say expectations about future prices. Hmm. So you think that the product that you want to buy, it's going to get more expensive in the future. Okay. So let's say there's an increase in, let's say, the future price of my favorite hot dogs. So very soon, I think that the price of hot dogs is going to skyrocket. The same hot dog that costs $2 right now, I feel like next month is going to start to cost $10. So what happens to my demand of hot dogs right now while it's still $2? It goes up. Okay, I'm thinking to myself, I might as well buy as many of these hot dogs as I can right now before the price goes up in the future. Now, it doesn't really have to go up in the future. Okay, my prediction doesn't have to be right. But as long as I think that way, my demand for right now is going to change. And what you're going to see a lot of the times with these type of predictions or expectations is they're what we call self-fulfilling prophecies. Because you think it's going to happen, you're going to change your decision making. And what that's going to do is that's going to make it happen. So if you think that the price of hot dogs is going to go up in the future, you start buying a lot more right now. And then we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but if you start buying a lot more right now, and everybody across the economy starts buying more and more hot dogs right now, what do you think is going to happen to the price of hot dogs? Well, if people want something a lot more now than before, prices usually tend to go up. Okay? So because you thought that prices were going to go up, you changed your behavior, you're demanding more right now, and that's what's causing the prices to go up. Okay? Self-fulfilling prophecy. Next up, we have a change in expectations about your future income. Let's say that you think that your future income is going to be higher. I don't care if you're going to get more money in reality or not, because you think you're going to get extra money, because you think your boss is going to give you a raise. Your demand of hot dogs and your demand of all products is going to start to go up. Okay? It might be easier to think about this in the opposite direction. If you think that you're going to lose your job, if you're very, very scared about that, and you think that your boss next week is going to fire you, what happens to your demand of products right now? Oh man, you're scared out of your mind. You're going to start demanding less and less products. Okay, so future expectations changes around current decisions. The number of buyers, very important too. Uh, this is when we're talking about something called market demand. So we're not just talking about your demand. We're talking about all the buyers in a certain area or in a certain country or around the world in some region. Okay, we're talking about overall market demand. Okay, so let's say we're talking about the town of Boston. I have no idea what Boston looks like. Okay, so let's say this is Boston with however many people there are. Okay, and now we have a total demand of hot dogs. Let's say every month people demand something like 2 million hot dogs. I don't know if that seems like a lot or not. Okay, but now as we start to get more and more people coming into Boston, the number of buyers is starting to increase. Well, since there's more people, it's very it's easy to see how the demand of hot dogs is going to increase as well. Okay, so more people means more demand. Now, we talked about all of those different determinants of demand. Each one of them is very, very important. But by far, by far, by far, the most important determinant of demand is going to be price. I'm not talking about the price of substitutes or the price of complements. I'm talking about the price of the product itself. And you guys know that, okay? The biggest thing that determines how much of something or if you buy something is how much it costs, okay? And what we see is price and the quantity demanded, the amount that you buy, are usually going to be inversely related to each other, okay? So that as the price goes up, that's going to lead to a decrease in the quantity demanded. Of course, if something gets cheaper, that leads to an increase in the quantity demanded. Now, I know one thing might look a little bit weird. Everything we've talked about so far has been affecting demand, demand, demand. But here, I wrote it in some weird way. I said an increase in price leads to a decrease in not demand, but a decrease in quantity demanded. Okay? There's a reason that we do this, and well, hello. And the reason we do this is because we like to focus on this determinant of price. This is the important one. All those other things important, but this one is super important. Okay, so we're going back to that idea of ceteris paribus that I mentioned before. All else equal. if I'm looking at all of those different determinants of demand, and all of those guys are changing at the same time, I have no idea what's going on. I'm not sure if you're going to buy more hot dogs or fewer hot dogs. Okay? So, what I want to do is I want to focus on one of those guys, one of those determinants. And the one I always want to focus on is price of the product. Okay? So, while I do that, I'm pretending, I'm assuming, I'm imagining that all of those other determinants, okay, not that they're equal to zero, but whatever they are, they're not changing. The only thing I want to change is the price. And I want to see how that affects how much of something people buy. Okay? So, it's like by definition, I'm saying that quantity, or sorry, that price is affecting quantity demanded. Everything else is affecting demand. It's price and only price that affects quantity demanded. The reason why I do that is I want to figure out this relationship. I want to figure out if the price of hot dogs is $10. Well, how much are people going to buy? Or $10 is way too much. Hot dogs are $5. That's a little bit expensive. Let's say people buy 100 hot dogs. But if the price goes down to $4, that's a little bit more reasonable. Let's say quantity demanded goes up to 250. Let's say price goes down to $3. Ooh, that's super nice. The quantity demanded goes up to 500. If the price drops to $2, oh my goodness, 2,000 people, or people are going to want to buy 2,000 hot dogs. And this is usually the relationship that we see with price and quantity demanded. Okay, as price goes down, we start to see quantity demanded go up. Or another way of thinking about that, as price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. Okay, we have that nice inverse relationship. Okay, by the way, this is what we call a demand schedule. And while we build this demand schedule, this table of price versus quantity demanded, behind the scenes, what we're doing is we're assuming all of those other determinants are being held ceteris paribus. They're being held equal. Okay, so I'm assuming that, let's say, your income was $40,000 and it's not changing. I'm assuming that the price of Coke, which is a substitute, is $2. I'm assuming that the price of a hamburger, which was a substitute, was something like $3. Okay. So all of these guys have values, but I'm assuming, I'm pretending like each one of those guys is not changing at all. And the only change I want to see is price. And I want to see how that affects quantity demanded. Okay? Because again, if while I'm changing these prices, well, the price of Coke changes from $2 to $3, and the price of a hamburger goes from $3 to $2.50, and your income goes up to $50,000. Wow, if all of those things are changing at the same time, I have no idea how much people are buying. It's too complicated. So I want to focus on the price. So I'm just pretending like all of these other guys are being held constant. Okay. Now, this inverse relationship that we see with price and quantity demanded, it happens so often that we call this the law of demand. The law of demand. Price and quantity demanded are inversely related. They move in opposite directions. Okay. Now, what we love to do in econ is we love to come up with something like the law of demand and say, this is the way it always, always is. But then we talk about, you know what, there's some products out there that kind of break the law of demand. There's some products out there that as it gets more expensive, oh man, people want to buy more of it. Or as it gets cheaper, instead of wanting to buy more, people want to buy less of it. Okay? The one example I could think of is fashionable handbags. Okay? You would naturally think, since it's a product, okay, as the price goes up, people would want to buy less. But there's some people out there, it seems like for these handbags, as the price goes up, people want it a lot more. Okay? Because it's not being used as a bag to carry your stuff in, it's being used as a status symbol. Okay, it's being seen as, you know what, if I carry this around, people know how much money I spent on this. Okay, and if they know that the price of this is a lot more expensive than it was before, and I still have it, they're going to know that I'm very rich and I'm comfortable spending this kind of money on a bag. Okay, it might be interesting to think about it in the opposite direction too. If the price of something goes down, you naturally think that people want to buy more of it. But for this handbag, if the price of this very fancy handbag went from, man, I have no idea what an expensive handbag costs. Let's say crazy expensive, like $10,000. Okay. And let's say it went on sale down to $1,000. Oh my goodness, huge sale. You would think, oh my gosh, it's flying off the shelves. People buy this up like crazy. But what you might see is people don't really buy this more anymore. Okay. The reason being, they know it went on sale, but they know that other people know that it went on sale. So if I buy this handbag and start carrying it around, people might think, oh, he only got that because it was so cheap. Okay, so these type of products that break the law of demand, we either call these, for different reasons, we call these Veblen goods or we call these Giffen goods. Okay, it's named after the people who came up with this idea. Okay, but this is what we love to do in econ. Okay, take a look at the way things are. Take a look at what we know. Okay, and then sit there and think about it and try to come up with examples of products that kind of break that rule. Okay, and try to explain why that is. All right, so for us, for the rest of econ, we'll be focusing on the normal stuff. But I always want you to think about, wait a second, can it happen this way as well? That really helps your understanding of what's going on. Okay, so pay attention to what I'm saying. Try to absorb it. Okay, but don't just blindly believe it. Okay, listen to it, think about it, and if you could think of different ways of doing it, just bring it up in class and we could discuss it. Okay, but for us in class, we're going to be focusing on the law of demand. Price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. All right. Okay. Ah, so this is how we come up with the demand curve. Okay, we love looking at pictures in econ. So we're going to do exactly what we did before. We're going to be relating the price of something to the quantity demanded. Okay, and here again, we see a nice inverse relationship. As the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. And then what we're going to do is we're going to plot that on a graph here with price on the vertical and quantity demanded on the horizontal. And then all we're doing is we're plotting these. We're saying at a price of 25 cents, it seems like people want to buy 120 cups of coffee. So that's 1 point there. Okay. And then at this price, there's another quantity demanded. And at this price, there's another quantity demanded. At this price, there's another quantity demanded. And after we plot each and every single one of these points, okay, then we're going to use some statistics and we're going to try to find the line of best fit. It's kind of sort of like we're trying to connect the dots here. And after we connect the dots, that's going to be my overall demand curve. Okay. This is known as the demand curve. The little shortcut is I just write it as D. Okay, the little shortcut here is instead of price, I just write P. The little shortcut here is instead of quantity demanded, I write QD. Hello. Okay, so I could redraw that for you. It'll just be price, quantity demanded, and I see a nice inverse relationship in my demand curve. What that shows me is as my price increases from, I don't know, I'll call this P1, that's related to this Q1. As my price increases to P2, what happens is my quantity demanded has decreased to Q2. Okay, so what that demand curve shows me is at all of these different price levels, what's going to be the quantity demanded. Okay, so from whatever price you're looking at, move it over and where it touches the demand curve, bring it down, and that's the quantity demanded that's related to that price. Uh, just to make sure you guys really understand this, okay, I'm going to talk about some interesting features about AP micrographs. Um, This is what might make econ a little bit confusing at first. Okay, at least for me, it was a little bit confusing. If you go back to your math classes from like fourth or fifth grade, whenever you graph something, this was the x-axis and this was the y-axis. Okay, and like let's say this was a line. The way you write the equation of that line was always y is equal to mx plus b. All right, so m was the slope term, b was the y-intercept. Okay, but it was always y is equal to mx plus b. We never wrote this as x is equal to my plus b, right? The reason why we did that is the x is what's known as our independent variable. And the y is, well, it's the opposite of that. It's the dependent variable. Okay, you might not have thought about this before, but what that means is x is the cause and y is the effect. Y depends on what x is. So if I stick a 1 in here, well, that's going to change around what my y is. If I put a 5 in here, that's going to change around what my y is. Okay, so my y variable, it depends on what my x variable is. Okay, so it's this guy that's leading, that's causing the changes in this guy. So that's the way that we've done it in math classes without even realizing it. Okay, independent variable is the x, the dependent variable is the y. In econ, though, we write this as the P and as this as the QD. But if you think about it, is it the quantity demanded that determines the price? Or is it the price that determines the quantity demanded? From what we
Price that determines quantity demanded.
So this is a little bit weird because now here is our independent variable up here in the y-axis, and here is our dependent variable here on our x-axis. Everything is flipped backwards. Okay, so it would actually make a lot more mathematical sense for us to write these as QD up here and P down here. Changes in this lead to changes in this, that direction, okay? But we always do it in this direction, okay? There's a reason for this. We'll get to that a little bit later, okay? But for now, know this and don't forget this, okay? Just realize that everything is backwards. Realize that it is not QD that affects P. It's the other way around. It's the P that affects QD, okay? All right. Just wanted to make sure you guys realize that. Okay. We could talk about the idea of market demand. Okay. Market demand is what we call a horizontal summation of individual people's demand. A horizontal summation. Okay. So here's two people. We have Dave and we have Diane. Every single person is different. Every single person has different income, has different tastes and preferences, has different, they like products differently. Okay, there's no reason to think that every single person is exactly the same. So, if we're talking about, what are we talking about here? I guess cups of coffee. Okay, if a cup of coffee cost $1, according to Dave's demand curve, he would want to buy 60 cups of coffee. If a cup of coffee costs $1, Diane would decide to buy 80 cups of coffee. So, if there's only Dave and Diane in this market, what we're going to do is we're going to add their demand curves together to come up with overall market demand. Okay, and of course, with more and more people, we're just going to do the same thing. We're going to add more and more people horizontally. Okay, what I mean by horizontally is at $1, Dave wanted 60. At $1, Diane wanted 80. So at $1, how many do we need in total to satisfy everybody in the market? Dave and Diane are not going to share these cups of coffee. It's not like, oh, Dave wants 60, Diane wants 80, so I guess we need 80 to satisfy everybody. No. We're going to need 60 for Dave. We're going to need 80 for Diane. We're going to need 140 cups of coffee together. That's what we call the horizontal summation. We're adding these guys together to come up with overall market demand. Okay? We do that at every single price point. At $1.25, Dave wants 40. At $1.25, Diane wants 50. So at $1.25, altogether we need 40 plus 50. We need 90. Okay? So it's always going to be this way whenever we're talking about private goods. A private good just means that's something that you don't share. Okay? You want 60, another person wants 80, you're going to need 140 altogether. Okay, that's why it's going to be a horizontal summation. All right. Quantity demanded versus demand. You guys are going to see this a lot on the AP test. Okay, they really drive this point home. It's price, and only price that affects quantity demanded. That's the way we set up our little chart here. Okay, at different prices, we wanted to see what happens to our quantity demanded. What the? Why am I going wrong direction? Something like that. Okay, P and QD move in opposite directions, but again, it's only price that affects quantity demanded. When we talk about demand, that's all of those other caterus paribus conditions. All of those other things like price of substitutes, price of complements, tastes and preferences, number of buyers, income, all of those affect demand. They do not affect quantity demanded. Now, I know that might just seem like semantics. It's just wording. It doesn't really matter. Okay, I get it. Okay, but it's going to be very important because it's going to show us what we're going to have to do with these graphs. Okay, so remember, the way we set up this graph was by looking at what was this called? A demand schedule. Okay, and when we set up this demand schedule, we only wanted to look at the relationship between price and quantity demanded. We understood that there were all of those other determinants of demand, like income, like a price of a complement and price of a substitute. But we assumed that those guys were at some level and they were fixed. They're not going to change. Okay, and the only thing that we're changing here is the price of the product itself. That's how we came up with this demand curve. But what we love to do now is we love to change these ceteris paribus conditions. We love to say, all right, we came up with this demand curve assuming that your income was $40,000. But now, you know what? Let's say that you're earning $50,000. Well, now what's going to happen to this demand curve? This demand curve no longer makes sense because this demand curve was built on the assumption that you were earning $40,000. But now that you're earning more than before, this one demand curve, it doesn't work. But it's very, very easy to come up with a new demand curve from this new condition. Okay? Because what we know is at every single price, P1, P2, P3, I used to want this much, Q1, Q2, Q3. But that's when my income was $40,000. But now that my income is more, at every single price, I'm going to be able, or I'm going to want to buy more than before. Okay, again, assuming that this is a normal good, if your income goes up, your demand for this product goes up. Okay, and what that means is at every single price level where your demand was before, now your demand is going to be higher. Wherever your demand was before, now it's going to be higher. Where your demand was before, now it's going to be higher. At every single price, you're going to want to buy more than before. That means your entire demand curve has actually shifted over. The entire demand curve has moved. Okay? And for us in econ, we just like a nice parallel shift. Now, one thing you have to be super, super careful about is the direction of this shift. Which way did this demand curve move? I know there's a couple of different ways for you to think about that. It moved outward, or your demand curve has increased, it's moved up, or your demand curve has moved over to the right. Only one of those is going to be correct. Okay? Your demand curve did not move 45 degrees outward. No. Your demand curve did not increase, shift upward. No. Your demand curve actually shifted to the right. Very, very important. Okay? So demand and supply curves later on we'll talk about. They never ever move up and down. They always move left and right. The reason for that is what we explained here. At every single price, the quantity demanded is higher than it was before. The demand is higher. The entire demand curve has moved over a couple steps over to the right. Okay? So, all those things that we talked about before, we could use that now. Okay? We could say that, all right, you know what? We came up with this one demand curve. Okay? So that, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm stuck in macro thinking. Q and Q. There's my demand curve. Okay, so that was the relationship between price and quantity demanded that I figured out. But now let's say I start changing around some of my other determinants of demand. Let's say that I had, what can we do? Let's say there was a increase in the price of a substitute. Well, how is that going to affect my demand of this product? Well, if hamburgers are a lot more expensive right now, that's going to cause me to increase my demand of hot dogs. Okay? What that means is for this product, the demand has increased. I know that I write increase in demand as a little shortcut like that. I write it as up D. But when you start moving around your demand curve, what you're not going to be doing is you're not going to be moving this demand curve up. Instead, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be shifting this demand curve to the right. This is an increase in demand. Okay? And by the way, get used to that nomenclature. Okay? If you ever shift around a demand curve, make sure to label it. Okay? But label it as D too. Okay? Get used to subscripts. What else can we do? Let's say that there's a. I'll make it hard on you. Let's say there's an increase in your income. Oh, fantastic. But let's say we're talking about an inferior good. What happens to your demand?
Which one's inferior?
Inferior is the stuff that you buy just because it's cheap. You can think about it as the bad products, like the cup noodles or the bus tickets. If
Oh,
you
so
earn
you're like you if you earn more, then that will go down. Like your demand for those goods will go down
good, so which way does the demand curve shift?
to
Eh,
the left.
to the left. Good. Okay. Now, for this demand curve, you have a little bit more wiggle room here. Okay, because if you thought about it wrong, okay, and you thought about it as shifting up, well, technically, it kind of still works. If you thought about, oh, demand decreases, so it goes down, and you know what, you thought about it the wrong way, but it still works. Okay, do not rely on that though, because next time when we talk about the supply curve, if you think about up and down instead of left and right, you're going to screw yourself. Okay, so from the very, very beginning, just always remember shift these curves left and right, never up and down. Okay, always think about it as okay, since I'm changing around my caterer's paribus condition, that means at every price, I'm going to want more than before, or at every price, I'm going to want less than before. At every price, you're going to be moving left and right. So the entire curve is moving left and right. Okay? That's it. Okay? We're done with the demand side. Next week, we'll talk about the supply side. We'll try to go through that very, very quick. And then all we're going to do is we're going to combine the supply and the demand analysis, and we're going to see how prices and quantities are determined in the market. Okay? Have a good weekend. I'll see you guys next week.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye bye.